The year was 1867. In a small apartment in Warsaw, Poland, under the shadow of Russian rule, Maria Salomea Skłodowska was born into a world that sought to limit her potential before she had even taken her first breath. Her father, Władysław Skłodowski, was a dedicated teacher of mathematics and physics, a man of intellect and principle. Her mother, Bronisława, was the headmistress of a respected girls' school, a woman of quiet strength. Yet, despite their wisdom and aspirations, there was an unspoken truth that loomed over the family. Education, particularly for women, was a dangerous pursuit in a land where oppression ruled with an iron grip. The Russian Empire controlled Poland with ruthless efficiency. Polish identity was suffocated, language and culture suppressed, and education was tightly regulated. Schools were forced to teach in Russian, and any attempt to promote Polish history or national pride was met with severe consequences. Still inside the Skłodowski home, knowledge was not just preserved, it was sacred. Books on physics, chemistry, and mathematics lined the walls, filling the air with ideas that defied the restrictions imposed by the Tsarist regime. Maria, the youngest of 5 children, drank in every word, yet even the warmth of intellect could not shield her from tragedy. When she was just 10 years old, her mother, already weakened by tuberculosis, succumbed to the disease. The loss was devastating. Maria had already experienced grief before her eldest sister, Sophia, had died of typhus a few years prior, but this was different. The woman who had guided her, who had instilled in her a love for learning, was gone. Maria did not cry. She did not break down. Instead, she buried herself in her studies as if knowledge could somehow fill the void. There was no room for weakness. She excelled in school, proving herself to be an exceptional student. But no matter how gifted she was, the doors of opportunity remained shut. Women were not allowed to enroll in higher education institutions in Russian-controlled Poland. She watched as her older brother was sent to university, while she was expected to accept the limitations imposed upon her. But Maria was not one to accept limits. In the shadows, an underground movement thrived, a secret institution known as the Flying University, a network of intellectuals and scholars dedicated to providing forbidden knowledge, operated in defiance of Russian control. It was here, in clandestine classrooms hidden behind the facades of ordinary homes, that Maria found her refuge. She studied physics, chemistry, and mathematics with an insatiable hunger, absorbing ideas that she was never supposed to know. But the Flying University could only take her so far. Higher education in Poland was out of reach. If she wanted to truly pursue science, she would have to leave everything behind. Paris. The name alone was a beacon of hope. The Sorbonne, one of the greatest universities in the world, was there. But the cost was insurmountable. Her father's modest salary could barely support the family, let alone send her abroad. And so a plan was formed, a silent, unbreakable pact between sisters. Bronisława, her older sister, dreamed of becoming a doctor, but medical school required tuition, and neither of them could afford it alone. Maria would work as a governess, sending money to Bronisława to fund her studies in Paris. And when Bronisława had completed her education, she would return the favor, helping Maria escape to France. It was an agreement built on love, sacrifice, and an unyielding belief that they were meant for more. Maria took a position as a governess for a wealthy Polish family, the Żerowskis. The job was tolerable, but the circumstances were cruel. She lived among luxury, yet she herself had nothing. Worse still, she found herself falling in love with the family's eldest son, Kazimir Zerowski. He loved her too, but love was not enough. His parents would not allow their son to marry a poor governess. Kazimir, caught between love and duty, ultimately chose the life expected of him. Heartbroken but resolute, Maria refused to let the loss break her. If she could not have love, she would have knowledge. Every spare moment was spent studying late at night after her duties were done. She would retreat to her books. Her mind refusing to rest, she wrote letters to Bronislawa asking for updates on her medical studies in Paris, clinging to the hope that soon it would be her turn. Years passed. She watched Kazimir marry another. She endured long hours, endless obligations, and the slow suffocation of a life that was not meant for her, but the plan had not been abandoned. Bronislawa, now a doctor in Paris, had not forgotten their pact. In 1891, the letter arrived. It was time. She packed what little she had and boarded a train bound for France. The journey was long and exhausting, but as the city of Paris came into view, her heart pounded with something she had not felt in years: anticipation. The Sorbonne awaited. The future awaited. She was 24 years old, standing on the edge of a world that had tried to deny her, but she had defied them all, and she was just getting started. The air in Paris was unlike anything she had known, thick with the scent of coal smoke, damp with the Seine's mist, and filled with the murmurs of scholars, writers, and thinkers who walked the streets of the Latin Quarter, the very heart of France's intellectual world. The city was a place of ideas, of revolutions, not just political ones, but revolutions of the mind. And yet for Maria Skłodowska, now calling herself Marie to blend in, it was also a city of loneliness. The Sorbonne, the pinnacle of education in France, was both exhilarating and brutal. She had fought so hard to be here, but the reality was harsher than she had imagined. A single woman, a foreigner, penniless, and without connections, she was one among many students, but unlike most, she had no safety net. She had no money for proper lodging and could barely afford to eat. A cup of tea and a piece of bread were often her only meals for the day. The hunger gnawed at her, but she did not waver. The halls of the Sorbonne were filled with men, young men who had been raised in comfort, educated in the best schools, and prepared from childhood for the pursuit of knowledge. And then there was Marie, a woman among only a handful of female students, struggling not just to keep up, but to excel. The lectures were in French, a language she had only recently mastered, and the pace was relentless. She took meticulous notes, studying late into the night, her fingers stiff with cold in her tiny, unheated attic room. Sometimes she collapsed from exhaustion, waking up to find her books still open and her candle burned down to nothing. But failure was not an option. Physics, mathematics, and chemistry consumed her. She had a singular focus and an unshakable resolve. She attended lectures by the greatest minds of her time, absorbing their theories, challenging their ideas in her own mind. And soon, something remarkable happened. She began to rise. The professors took notice of the quiet, intense young woman who sat in the front rows scribbling furiously, asking the kind of questions that only the truly brilliant could conceive. Her fellow students, initially dismissive, found themselves seeking her help. The woman they had once overlooked was now surpassing them. Her first degree in physics came in 1893. First in her class, she had done it, but the victory was fleeting. There was no celebration, no respite. Her money had run out. Without funds, she could not continue her education. She was forced to take tutoring jobs teaching the daughters of wealthy families to make just enough to survive. It was a humiliating contrast imparting knowledge to those who had been given everything while she struggled to afford a single meal. But fortune, or perhaps fate, was not done with her yet. In 1894, an opportunity arose, a new project, a new chance to prove herself, and a meeting that would change everything. His name was Pierre Curie, a physicist, a man of quiet brilliance as devoted to his work as she was to hers. Unlike many men of his era, he was not threatened by her intellect, he was captivated by it. Their first meeting was arranged by a colleague, and though neither knew it at the time, history was being written in that moment. Pierre had already made significant contributions to science. His work on magnetism was groundbreaking, but he was a solitary figure, uninterested in fame, content in his laboratory. And then Marie entered his life like a force of nature. Their conversations were electrifying, a fusion of minds so rare that it defied convention. She had intended to return to Poland after her studies, but Pierre changed everything. He saw in her a partner, an equal, a woman unlike any he had ever met. He proposed marriage, but she hesitated. Poland still called to her, a voice she could not easily silence. She returned home that summer uncertain of her future, but Poland, despite her love for it, remained a land of limitations. There was no place for a woman scientist, no opportunity to continue her research. The realization was painful. Her homeland had given her birth, but Paris had given her a future. She returned to France to Pierre. This time she did not look back. They were married in July 1895, not in a lavish ceremony, but in a simple civil service without religious rites, without extravagance. There were no jewels, no lace, just two minds. United in purpose, their wedding gift to themselves was a pair of bicycles on which they rode through the countryside, lost in conversation, dreaming of discoveries yet to come. They set up their first laboratory together, a modest, almost primitive space. No grand institutions supported them, no wealthy benefactors provided funding. It was just them, two scientists working side by side, driven by nothing but curiosity. Marie had found her place, but she had no idea that she was on the brink of something that would shake the very foundations of science. The year was 1896, and a discovery had just been made by Henri Becquerel. A physicist studying uranium salts, he had noticed something peculiar. The uranium seemed to emit an invisible energy, a force that could pass through solid matter, leaving traces on photographic plates. It was inexplicable, it was mysterious, and it fascinated Marie. She took the phenomenon and made it her own. Others dismissed it as a curiosity. She saw it as a doorway into the unknown. What was this strange energy? How did it work? She would find out. Hour after hour, day after day, she worked tirelessly, measuring, recording, and experimenting. She coined the term radioactivity to describe the invisible force she was studying. But there was more. She began testing other elements, searching for something beyond uranium. And then, in the breakthrough in her painstaking analysis of pitchblende, a common mineral, she detected something new, an element that had never been seen before, something far more radioactive than uranium, polonium. She named it after her beloved Poland, a tribute to the land that had shaped her, even if it had not been able to contain her. But polonium was only the beginning. There was another element hidden in the pitchblende, something even more powerful, something waiting to be found. And so she continued pushing beyond exhaustion, beyond reason, beyond the limits of the human body. The laboratory was small, damp, and poorly equipped, but it was theirs. Amid rusting instruments and wooden tables covered in powders and minerals, Marie and Pierre Curie worked in silent synchrony. The world outside might have dismissed them. Two unknown scientists were chasing an enigma, but inside these walls, history was being rewritten. They had already uncovered polonium, an element Marie had named in honor of her homeland. But something else lurked within the pitchblende, something even more potent. Their discovery had begun with Henri Becquerel's chance observation that uranium emitted an invisible energy, something beyond the known laws of physics. But while others dismissed it as an anomaly, Marie saw a question waiting to be answered. Why did this energy persist? Could other materials possess similar properties? The more she experimented, the more she became certain the effect was not unique to uranium. Pitchblende, a heavy, dark mineral, was supposed to contain only uranium, but when she measured its radioactivity, the results defied explanation. It was more active than pure uranium itself. Something else, something unknown, was contributing to this powerful emission, an element beyond the periodic table, beyond human knowledge. The implications were staggering. She tested, measured, and calculated over and over. The numbers never lied. The mysterious element was real. Pierre, drawn into her obsession, abandoned his own research to join her. He had spent years studying crystals and magnetism, but this was different. This was a doorway into the unknown, and together they embarked on a journey that would push them to the brink of exhaustion and beyond. They needed proof. The scientific community would not accept a discovery based on calculations alone. They had to isolate this new element, extract it from the mineral, and see it with their own eyes. But the amount present in pitchblende was minuscule. It would take years to obtain enough material to study. They acquired tons of pitchblende, laboriously breaking it down, extracting fractions of a gram at a time. Their laboratory became an alchemist's den. Barrels of crushed rock, beakers filled with dark liquids, smoke rising from the boiling substances. The process was grueling, the work monotonous and backbreaking. They lifted heavy cauldrons, stirred bubbling solutions, and inhaled toxic fumes that left them dizzy and weak. Yet they never stopped. Day after day, Marie recorded their findings, meticulously noting every measurement. There was no time for rest, no time for reflection. The work consumed them, and yet there was something almost magical about it. At night, when the laboratory fell silent, when the last candle flickered in the darkness, the residues of their experiments began to glow a faint, eerie blue light, soft and otherworldly, as if the elements themselves were whispering their secrets. Radium. Marie had suspected its presence, but now she was certain. In July 1898, they announced the discovery of polonium. But in December of that same year, they revealed something far greater: the existence of radium. The world was astonished. A new element, more radioactive than anything known, more powerful than uranium, defying the fundamental understanding of matter itself. It was a revelation, but there was a problem. They had discovered radium's existence, But they had not yet isolated it to prove it was not an illusion. They had to extract a pure sample, and that, as they would soon realize, was a task beyond anything they had ever imagined. The work intensified. The exhaustion deepened. Marie's hands were raw, and her skin burned from exposure to unknown forces. Pierre suffered constant fatigue, but he refused to stop. Their laboratory became their entire world. They had no time for social gatherings, and no patience for distractions. They were no longer just scientists. They were explorers venturing into a realm untouched by human understanding. And yet the world outside began to take notice. Scientists debated their findings. Some skeptical, others odd. Journalists wrote of the mystery element discovered by a young Polish woman and her husband, a pair of unknown physicists working in a dilapidated shed. But fame meant nothing to them. Only the work mattered. As the months stretched into years, as their bodies grew weaker, as their resources dwindled, one thing remained unchanged: their resolve. They would not stop. They would extract radium. They would prove to the world that the unseen was real. And when they did, science would never be the same again. The discovery of radium was a scientific triumph, but it was not enough. The world would not accept calculations alone. The skeptics, the doubters, the scientific elite, many refused to believe in an element they could not see, could not touch. The Curies had uncovered something extraordinary, but without physical proof, it would remain a phantom, a theory without substance. And so the real battle began. To isolate radium, they needed to extract it from pitchblende, a mineral so dense and complex that separating its components was an almost impossible task. Radium existed in quantities so minuscule that only by processing enormous amounts of ore could they hope to isolate a single gram of pure substance. It was not a matter of days or weeks or months. It would take years. Their laboratory was inadequate for the scale of the work ahead. There was no sophisticated equipment, no modern machinery, only their hands, their minds, and their relentless determination. They secured access to discarded pitchblende from mines in Bohemia, material deemed worthless by the mining industry. It was radioactive waste to them, but to the Curies, it was the key to a scientific revolution. The shipments arrived in massive wooden barrels, hundreds of kilograms at a time. Their laboratory, already cramped and poorly ventilated, became a warehouse of rock and dust. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, the floors stained with residue from their endless experiments. The process was brutal. Day after day, they crushed the pitchblende, ground into fine powder, dissolved it in acid, and precipitated its different components. The work was both physically exhausting and mind-numbingly repetitive. It was chemistry at its most laborious, an alchemy of science and sheer human endurance. Boiling, during filtering, waiting hour after hour, their hands blackened with chemicals, their clothes soaked with sweat, their bodies aching from lifting heavy cauldrons and stirring bubbling solutions with iron rods. There were no protective measures. No one yet understood the true dangers of radioactivity. They inhaled the fumes, handled the glowing residues with bare hands, and felt the mysterious energy seep into their very bones. And yet, despite the hardships, there was wonder in the madness. At night, when the flames of the laboratory had dimmed and the experiments had been left to settle, the residues of their work would come alive, a pale blue glow, faint yet mesmerizing, as if the radium itself was whispering to them from the darkness. They watched in awe, exhausted but exhilarated. They had uncovered something beyond the visible world, a force unlike anything known to science, but discovery came at a cost. Pierre, always fragile in health, grew weaker with each passing month. His hands trembled, his limbs ached, and exhaustion weighed on him like a crushing force. Marie, too, felt the effects. Her fingers burned, her skin was irritated, and her body was weakened from the unrelenting exposure. But neither of them stopped. The work consumed them. They were no longer simply researchers. They were laborers refining their discovery through sheer force of will. They lived on meager rations, saving every penny for laboratory supplies. There were no luxuries, no comforts, no distractions, only science. Their love, their marriage, and their entire existence revolved around their shared pursuit of truth. Years passed. The progress was agonizingly slow, but then the first glimpse of success. After months of chemical extractions, Marie was able to isolate radium chloride, a purified form but still not pure radium metal. It was a triumph, a confirmation that radium was real, but it was not enough. The final step, the absolute proof, remained beyond reach. And yet, the world was beginning to take notice. Word of their work spread beyond the walls of their laboratory. Scientists across Europe spoke of the mysterious woman from Poland and her quiet, determined husband. The discovery of radium was becoming more than just an academic curiosity. It was a sensation. In 1902, after years of toil, Marie finally succeeded. Through endless refinement, through processes repeated thousands of times, she isolated 1/10 of a gram of pure radium chloride. It was the first time in history that the element had been seen in its true form, a substance unlike anything known to man. It glowed in the darkness, a pale, ghostly light, beautiful, mesmerizing, almost alive. The skeptics were silenced. The doubters had no choice but to believe. Marie had done it. She had pulled the invisible into the realm of the seen, forced nature to reveal one of its deepest secrets, and yet even in triumph, she knew this was only the beginning. The vial sat before her, glowing faintly in the dim light of the laboratory. A single 1/10 of a gram of radium chloride extracted through years of relentless toil, suffering, and unwavering belief. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen, a material that seemed almost alive, an element that defied the known laws of nature. The journey had been long, grueling, and at times nearly unbearable, but now she had done it. Marie's hands trembled not with hesitation, but with exhaustion. She had spent years exposing herself to the unknown energy of radium, its invisible rays penetrating her skin, burning her fingertips, and weakening her body in ways she did not yet understand. Pierre, too, had grown frail, his limbs aching, his strength diminishing, yet neither had ever considered stopping. They had sacrificed everything: comfort, health, and financial security. They had no fortune, no prestigious positions, only an unshakable dedication to science. While others in the academic world published theories and debated over formulas, Marie and Pierre had worked in the trenches of discovery, turning barrels of rock into history. But science does not exist in a vacuum. The world outside their laboratory had taken notice. The whispers of their work had turned into discussions, the discussions into debates, and soon recognition had followed. In 1903, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences announced that the Nobel Prize in Physics would be awarded to 3 scientists: Henri Becquerel, Pierre Curie, and Marie Curie. It was unprecedented. A woman had never won a Nobel Prize. The very idea was enough to unsettle the rigid structures of the scientific community. At first, the Academy had intended to honor only Pierre and Becquerel. Marie's contribution had been overlooked, dismissed as the work of a mere assistant, but Pierre, ever her equal in both love and intellect, refused to accept the honor without her. He insisted that she be recognized, that history acknowledges what was undeniable. Marie was not a helper, not a spectator. She was the very core of their work, and so her name was added. When the news arrived, Marie did not react with excitement. There was no celebration, no moment of triumph. She simply continued her work because the prize did not matter to her. The discovery did. The science did. Fame was fleeting, but knowledge was permanent. But the world had changed around her. Overnight, she became a symbol, a woman who had defied expectations, broken barriers, and rewritten the rules. Journalists sought her out, eager to craft a narrative around this extraordinary figure. This Polish immigrant who had risen to the heights of scientific achievement. Some marveled at her brilliance, while others viewed her as an anomaly, an exception to the rule. Yet even as accolades poured in, she remained detached. She had never sought recognition, only truth. She and Pierre were still living in the same modest conditions, still struggling to fund their research, still suffering from the effects of prolonged exposure to radium. At the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm, they were celebrated, honored, and deeply uncomfortable. Pierre, ever the introvert, despised the attention, and Marie found it equally distracting. The formalities, the dinners, the endless speeches, none of it mattered to them. They longed to return to their laboratory, to the only place where they truly felt at home. But even in triumph, shadows loomed. Pierre's health was deteriorating. His body, once strong, was now failing him. The constant exposure to radiation had left him chronically fatigued, his bones aching, and his hands shaking. At times, he could barely stand. Marie, too, felt the effects. She ignored the pain in her fingers, the strange weakness that crept into her limbs. They did not yet understand the consequences of their work, did not know that the very substance they had uncovered was slowly poisoning them. But there was no stopping now. With the Nobel Prize came a financial award, money that could finally provide them with a proper laboratory, with better equipment, with the resources they had long lacked. For the first time, they had the means to push their research further, to expand their understanding of radioactivity, to see just how deep this mystery went. And yet, the world wanted more from them. Invitations poured in from universities, scientific societies, and government institutions. Everyone wanted to hear from the Curies, to bask in their brilliance, to claim a piece of their legacy. But Pierre resisted. He hated the attention, the obligation to perform for an audience that could never understand the true weight of discovery. Marie, as always, was unshaken. She understood that science was not just about the work. It was about the future. Their discoveries had the potential to change medicine, to transform industries, and to unlock new realms of knowledge. And so, even as exhaustion threatened to consume her, she pressed on. But Pierre was slipping away. The world celebrated their achievements, but within the walls of their home, something unspoken lingered. A fear, a silent acknowledgement that time was running out. And then, In an instant, everything changed. One rainy afternoon on April 19, 1906, Pierre Curie stepped onto the streets of Paris. His mind no doubt lost in thought, his body weary from years of relentless pursuit. He was crossing Rue Dauphine when a horse-drawn carriage, heavy with cargo, thundered toward him. He did not see it. The horse reared, the wheels turned, and Pierre was gone. The news shattered Marie's world. Her partner, her equal, the man who had stood by her in every struggle, in every triumph, was gone in an instant, crushed beneath the weight of a world that had never truly understood him. She did not cry. She did not collapse. She did what she had always done. She continued. Pierre's death should have broken her, but instead it hardened her. In the wake of tragedy, she made a decision that defied all expectations. She would not fade into grief. She would not step aside. Instead, she would take Pierre's place at the Sorbonne. She, a woman in a world of men, would step into the role of professor, a position no woman had ever held before. She would teach, she would lead, and she would push forward the very research they had begun together. The chair at the Sorbonne was empty. Pierre's absence was a wound that would never heal, a void that no amount of scientific achievement could fill. His desk remained untouched, his notes scattered where he had left them. Marie did not move them. She could not for days after his death. She barely spoke. The world outside mourned in its own way. Obituaries, tributes, and solemn words were spoken in hushed tones, but none of it mattered. Grief had no language, no ceremony grand enough to contain it. He had been more than a husband, more than a collaborator. He had been the only person who truly understood the weight of her ambitions and the fire of her curiosity. And now he was gone. But grief, even in its sharpest form, did not deter her. Could not. There was work to be done. When the Sorbonne offered her Pierre's professorship, it was not an act of generosity. It was a gamble. A woman had never held such a position. There were whispers and doubts. Could she command a lecture hall? Would the students respect her? Could she truly replace him? On the day of her first lecture, the amphitheater was filled beyond capacity. Scientists, journalists, intellectuals, and everyone wanted to witness the moment to see if she would falter. But when Marie stepped to the podium, there was no hesitation. She did not speak of loss. She did not speak of grief. She spoke of radioactivity. She picked up where Pierre had left off, her voice steady, her presence undeniable. The lecture was not just a continuation. It was a declaration she would not disappear into mourning. She would not fade into history as the widow of Pierre Curie. She was Marie Curie, and she was not done. Her research intensified. She immersed herself in further study of radium, refining her experiments, deepening her understanding of the element that had defined her life. She established a new laboratory, expanding the scope of her work. But there was another goal now, one beyond the pursuit of knowledge. Radium had the power to heal. Doctors had begun using radium to treat cancer, its mysterious energy capable of shrinking tumors. What had once been a scientific enigma was now saving lives. The implications were staggering, but while the world marveled at radium's potential, Marie was facing a new battle, one not fought in laboratories but in the public eye. Fame had never interested her, but it had come nonetheless. With Pierre's death, she had become more than just a scientist. She had become a symbol, a woman who had defied convention, a pioneer in a field dominated by men, a figure who inspired and unsettled in equal measure. And then came Paul Langevin, a fellow physicist, a married man, a friend, and, for a brief time, something more. Their relationship, real or exaggerated, became a scandal that gripped Paris. The newspapers were relentless, their words laced with venom. They did not see Marie as a brilliant mind, as a Nobel laureate. They saw her as a foreign woman, a widow daring to seek companionship, an outsider who did not know her place. Her letters to Langevin were stolen, published in the press, and dissected with malicious delight. Headlines screamed accusations of immorality and betrayal. Protesters gathered outside her home, calling her a homewrecker, a disgrace. She had faced prejudice before, but this was an attack not on her science, but on her very existence. The timing could not have been worse. As the scandal reached its peak, the Nobel Committee announced that Marie Curie had been awarded the 1911 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. She had done what no one in history had. She had won a second Nobel Prize, a feat unmatched, a recognition of her unparalleled contribution to science. But the honor was overshadowed by the scandal. The Swedish Academy quietly suggested that she should not attend the ceremony. That, perhaps for the sake of dignity, she should decline the award altogether. Marie did not hesitate. She packed her bags, she traveled to Stockholm, and she stood before the Academy accepting the prize not as a woman caught in a scandal, not as the widow of Marie Curie, but as a scientist. Her speech did not mention the accusations. She did not acknowledge the journalists who had hounded her, the mobs who had shouted outside her door. She spoke of radium. She spoke of its properties, its potential, and the uncharted possibilities it offered to the world. Science, she reminded them, was above scandal, above gossip, above petty minds that sought to destroy what they could not understand. The world had tried to break her. It had failed, but the battle had taken its toll. By the end of 1911, Marie was exhausted. Her body had suffered years of exposure to radiation, though she did not yet understand the full consequences. Her health was failing, her strength waning. The radiation burns on her hands, the chronic fatigue, the unexpected, unexplained illnesses. She pushed through them all, unwilling to acknowledge that the very substance she had dedicated her life to was slowly killing her. She retreated from the public eye, focusing on her daughters, on her work, and on the growing impact of radium in medicine. She had been dragged through the fire, but she had emerged scarred but standing. And though she did not yet know it, her greatest legacy was only beginning. The weight of 2 Nobel Prizes should have been enough to shield her, but it did not. The whispers followed her, the headlines clung to her like shadows, and the scandal refused to die. Even as she held her second Nobel Prize in her hands, the world continued to judge her, not as a scientist, not as a pioneer, but as a woman who had dared to live on her own terms. She withdrew from the public eye, retreating into the solitude of her laboratory. The world outside was too loud, too cruel. Science had always been her refuge, the one place where she was untouchable, where equations and discoveries did not care for rumors or reputations, and so she did what she had always done. She worked, but the work had changed. Radium, once an enigma known only to a few, was now the most sought-after substance in the world. The medical community had seized upon its potential. Its mysterious energy was being used to treat cancer. Its ability to destroy diseased tissue hailed as a miracle. Hospitals begged for it. Industries fought to control it. Radium had become more valuable than gold, more powerful than anyone had imagined, and yet Marie refused to profit from it. Others urged her to patent her process, to claim ownership over the element she had uncovered. She could have been wealthy beyond measure, but wealth had never interested her. Science was for everyone. Knowledge was not to be locked away behind legal barriers. She made her findings public, allowing researchers around the world to study radium and use it freely to build upon her discoveries. But there was something else, a fear she could not yet voice, a truth she did not want to acknowledge. Radium was killing her. She ignored the warning signs, the constant fatigue, the burns on her hands, and the strange illnesses that plagued her. She had spent years handling radium without protection, unaware of the invisible danger it carried. The glowing vials she had once admired now left her bones aching. Her body was weak, but she refused to stop. Her daughters, Erin and Eve, were her only solace. They were growing, learning, and watching. Erin, in particular, had inherited her mother's passion for science. Marie saw herself in her brilliant, determined relentless. But was this the future she wanted for her child? A life of isolation, a world that would judge her by her gender before her mind? And then the war came. The world was shifting, nations rising against each other, and suddenly radium was no longer just a scientific marvel. It was a weapon, a resource, and a tool that governments sought to harness. But Marie had no time for politics, no patience for war, until she realized that she could not ignore it. Soldiers were dying by the thousands. Wounds that might have been treatable were left to fester. Bodies shattered by bullets and shrapnel lay unattended on the battlefield. And then it struck her. X-rays. The very energy she had spent her life studying could be used to save lives, and so Marie Curie, the scientist, became something else. She would not stand by while men died. She would bring science to the battlefield, and once again the world would see just how far she was willing to go. The war consumed everything. Cities crumbled, borders bled, and the world drowned in its own violence. Marie had spent her life studying forces invisible to the human eye, but nothing she had ever encountered was as destructive as this. World War I was unlike any conflict before it. Machines replaced men. Science fueled destruction, and the battlefield was a place of horror beyond imagination. But science could do more than kill. As reports of the wounded flooded in, she read of men dying not just from bullets and explosions, but from infections, from amputations performed too late. From doctors who worked in the dark, blindly cutting through flesh with no way of seeing the damage inside. It was chaos, crude and unforgiving, and utterly unnecessary. Marie knew there was another way: X-rays. She had studied them for years and understood their power. With X-ray machines, doctors could see inside the body without cutting it open, locate bullets, detect fractures, and operate with precision. But hospitals were far from the front lines, and transporting the wounded was often impossible. If the soldiers could not reach the X-rays, then the X-rays would have to reach the soldiers. She designed mobile radiology units, small transportable machines fitted into vans capable of bringing X-ray technology to the battlefield itself. They would be called Petite Curies, but she was not content to simply design them. She wanted to be there to see them work, to ensure they made a difference. At the age of 47, Marie Curie, a two-time Nobel Prize winner, and a world-renowned scientist, trained herself as a radiologist and learned how to drive. She had never been behind the wheel of a vehicle before, but now she piloted her own mobile X-ray unit straight into the heart of the war. The battlefields were nothing like the quiet order of her laboratory. The stench of blood and burning flesh clung to the air. The sound of distant explosions shook the ground beneath her. She saw things no scientist was ever meant to see. Bodies torn apart, young men crying out for their mothers, and doctors whose hands trembled from exhaustion. But when she stepped into the makeshift operating rooms, she did not flinch. She set up the machines herself, trained nurses, and assisted doctors. She placed X-ray plates beneath shattered limbs, adjusted the tubes, and illuminated the unseen wounds within. The doctors who had once operated blindly now had a guide, a way to save lives instead of taking them. She did not sleep. She barely ate. She traveled from one battlefield to the next, moving through the war like a ghost, appearing wherever she was needed, then disappearing again. And she was not alone. Her daughter, Irin, just 17, joined her. Together, mother and daughter worked side by side, watching the war through the cold glow of the X-ray screen, bearing witness to human suffering on a scale few could comprehend. The soldiers called Marie their Madame Curie, but to them she was more than a name. She was a savior. By the end of the war, her mobile units had examined over 1 million wounded soldiers. She had no medals, no official honors, and no recognition from the government. And she did not care. She had done what science was meant to do. She had saved lives, but the war had taken its toll. Her body, already weakened by years of exposure to radium, was deteriorating. The endless stress, the exhaustion, the radiation. She could feel it in her bones, in the tremble of her hands, in the darkness that clouded her vision when she worked for too long without rest. She did not stop. She had spent years watching radium glow in the dark, but now when she looked at her hands, she saw something else. A slow death. The war was over, but her battle back was just beginning. The war had ended, but the scars remained. Cities lay in ruins, nations grieved their dead, and the world struggled to piece itself back together. Marie Curie had done her part. She had stood on the front lines, bringing science to the battlefield, saving lives where war sought to take them, and now she returned to her true home, the laboratory. But something had changed. Her body, once resilient, now betrayed her. Exhaustion did not fade. The pain in her hands did not subside. She ignored it as she always had. There was too much left to do. Radium, once a scientific curiosity, had become a sensation. It was no longer confined to research institutions and hospitals. It had entered the world of commerce, of beauty, of industry. Products boasting miraculous radium flooded the market. Radium water for health, radium-infused face creams for eternal youth, and radium-laced toothpaste for a perfect smile. It was hailed as a gift from science, a cure for ailments, and a force of rejuvenation. Marie watched with unease. She had never claimed radium to be harmless. She had not understood its dangers in the beginning, but she knew now something was wrong. Her own body told her so. The burns on her hands, the unrelenting fatigue, the way her vision blurred after long hours in the lab. Something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. But the world did not listen. Factories were built, employing young women to paint watch dials with radium-laced paint. They were told it was safe, that the glow was harmless. They licked their brushes to form fine points, unknowingly swallowing tiny doses of poison every single day. The radium girls, as they would later be called, one by one began to sicken. Their teeth fell out, their jaws crumbled, and their bones fractured under the weight of an unseen enemy. Doctors were baffled the companies denied responsibility, but Marie had seen it before in herself. She had spent decades handling radium with her bare hands, breathing in its invisible energy, letting it seep into her very bones. She had thought it was a wonder. Now she understood the cost. And yet, even as radium claimed its victims, she could not abandon it. It was not radium's fault. Science was not to blame. It was ignorance, human greed, the reckless desire to commercialize what had not yet been fully understood. Marie still believed in radium's potential, not as a beauty product, not as a luxury, but as a force for good cancer treatment. She had seen firsthand that radium could shrink tumors, destroy disease cells, and give hope to the hopeless. But if it was to be used in medicine, it had to be controlled, studied properly, and handled with caution. She made it her mission to build a place where this could happen, a research institute dedicated not to industry, not to profit, but to science and medicine. A place where radium could be understood, where its dangers could be studied alongside its potential. The Radium Institute she fought for funding, for recognition, and for the right to continue her work despite the whispers that followed her. She was aging, they said. She was ill. She had lost her touch. They did not know her. She had never worked for recognition, never fought for praise. She had only ever fought for knowledge, and now she fought for the future. By 1921, the Radium Institute was becoming a reality. Scientists flocked to it, eager to study radioactivity, to push the boundaries of what was possible. And yet, there was one obstacle Marie could not overcome. She did not have enough radium. Despite having discovered it, despite dedicating her life to it, she had almost no access to pure radium. The element had become too expensive, too rare. Her institute could not function without it. And so, for the first time in her life, she did something she had never done before. She left the laboratory. She went to America. It was an unusual sight. Marie Curie, the reserved, reclusive scientist, the woman who had spent her life in dimly lit laboratories and war hospitals, now found herself standing before crowds, before flashing cameras, before the expectant gaze of the world. She had never sought fame, never desired the stage, yet here she was, crossing the Atlantic to ask for what should have rightfully been hers: radium. She had given it to the world, and yet she had none for herself. The very element she had isolated, the discovery that had shattered the boundaries of science, was now locked behind financial barriers, hoarded by industries that saw it as a commodity rather than a key to knowledge. The price of radium had soared beyond what any scientist, no matter how decorated, could afford. Without it, the Radium Institute would be nothing more than an idea, an unfinished promise, so she did what she had to do. She traveled to America, reluctantly stepping into the public eye. The journey was orchestrated by powerful admirers, chief among them the journalist and socialite Missy Maloney, who had convinced Marie that the world owed her a debt. If the scientific community would not fund her, perhaps the people would, and the people did. America embraced her like a hero returning from battle. She was celebrated, paraded through cities, given honorary degrees, and hailed as the woman who had changed the face of science. She met the President of the United States, Warren G. Harding, who personally presented her with a gram of radium worth $100,000 raised through donations from thousands of Americans who believed in her work. It was enough to fuel the research to ensure that her institute would thrive, that radium would be used not as a gimmick, not as a novelty, but as a weapon against disease. But the trip took its toll. Marie had never enjoyed the spotlight, never cared for the weight of public expectation. She had endured the speeches, the interviews, and the endless receptions. But all she wanted was to return to her laboratory, to the quiet, measured world of discovery. She had spent her life in the pursuit of knowledge, and now time was slipping away. Her body was failing her. She had ignored the signs for too long, dismissed the weakness in her hands, the fatigue that never faded, and the way her vision blurred even in the brightest light. She had always been strong, stronger than the men who had doubted her, stronger than the scandals that had tried to destroy her. But science does not yield to strength, and neither did radiation. It had lived inside her for years, seeping into her bones, poisoning her blood, and unraveling her from the inside. She knew she had known for a long time, though she never spoke of it. What would be the point? The damage had been done, and she would not allow it to slow her. There was still too much left unfinished. Her daughters watched her with growing concern. Erin, now a scientist in her own right, had inherited her mother's relentless pursuit of knowledge. Eve, the younger, had taken a different path, drawn to music, to writing, to the world outside the cold steel of laboratories. They saw what she would not admit. She was growing weaker. She continued to work even as the pain deepened. She spoke in measured tones, never complaining, never wavering, but the weight of her illness was undeniable. The once steady hands that had held the future of science now trembled as she wrote. By the early 1930s, her world had grown smaller. The institute thrived, the research continued, but she no longer had the strength to lead it. She stepped back, allowing others to take the reins to build upon what she had created. And still, she did not stop. She traveled once more to America in 1929, this time to secure more radium for a laboratory in Warsaw. One final gift to the homeland that had shaped her, though it had never been able to hold her. She met Albert Einstein, who had long admired her and who saw in her a mind like no other. He walked with her along the shores of Lake Geneva, speaking of science, of philosophy, and of the future. He later wrote that she was perhaps the only person he had ever known who had not been corrupted by fame. But she was fading. By 1932, the symptoms could no longer be ignored. The woman who had spent her life illuminating the unseen could barely see at all. The light that had once guided her was dimming, and though she had spent her life defying limits, there were some that even she could not overcome. She had lived for discovery, and now she had little time left to see where it would lead. The air in the Swiss mountains was thin, but it was quiet, peaceful in a way that laboratories and lecture halls never were. Marie Curie had come here in the hope that the fresh mountain air would revive her, that perhaps distance from her life's work, the radium, the laboratories, the endless research, would give her strength. But science was not something she could step away from, nor was the damage it had done to her body something that fresh air could undo. Her vision was failing. The world around her had grown blurred and indistinct. The pain in her bones, which she had ignored for years, had become constant. An ache that no amount of willpower could suppress. Fatigue clung to her like a shadow, heavier than ever before. She had spent a lifetime working through exhaustion, through grief, through doubt, and through scandal. But this was different. She had always been resilient. Now her body was betraying her. Her daughters knew the truth before she ever spoke of it. Erin, who had followed her mother's path into science, had seen the signs before Marie was willing to admit them. Eve, who had chosen a different path. Music, writing a world away from the cold calculations of chemistry, watched with quiet sadness as the woman who had once been unshakable now struggled to move, to eat, and to hold a pen. The doctors confirmed what she had known all along: a plastic anemia, a condition so rare, so insidious that few understood it. But Marie understood. She had spent her life studying radiation, unraveling its mysteries, and harnessing its power, and now it was unmaking her. She did not rage, she did not despair. Death did not frighten her. It was simply another mystery, one she had no need to solve. But there was one final sorrow, one final truth that could not be ignored. She had spent her life seeking knowledge, believing in science, in progress, in the idea that discovery was worth any price. And yet the very element she had devoted herself to, the radium she had fought so hard to isolate, had been both her greatest triumph and her undoing. She had carried it with her for years, its glow a beacon in the darkness, its presence in her bones a silent poison. She had never feared hard work, never flinched in the face of suffering, but she had never imagined that the thing she had given so freely to the world would be what took everything from her in the end. In the final months, she left the laboratory for good. She no longer had the strength to work, to teach, or to lecture. Her hands, once so steady, trembled when she tried to write. Even reading, once her greatest solace, had become difficult, and yet she did not complain. She had never been one for sentimentality, never indulged in self-pity. She had lived her life on her own terms, fought for her place in a world that had not wanted to give it to her, and she had won. She spent her last days surrounded by those she loved. Erin sat beside her, their conversations now quiet, the discussions of physics and chemistry replaced by something more intimate, unspoken but understood. Eve played music for her, filling the silence with the soft notes of a piano, the kind of beauty that existed beyond equations and experiments. And then, on July 4th, 1934, in a small sanatorium in France, Marie Curie, two-time Nobel laureate and pioneer of radioactivity, the woman who had changed science forever, closed her eyes for the last time. She left behind no riches, no grand estate, no fortune amassed from her discoveries. But she left something greater, a legacy that would never fade. The news spread quickly. Marie Curie, the woman who had revolutionized science, was gone. Across the world, tributes poured in. Scientists, world leaders, students, and ordinary people alike recognized that they had lost someone irreplaceable. But even in death, she was not forgotten. She had never sought wealth, never cared for recognition, and never fought for personal fame. Yet her work had changed the world. The radium she had uncovered, the research she had pioneered, and the principles she had lived by remained etched into history. At the Radium Institute, where she had spent her final years, the work continued. Erin, her eldest daughter, stepped into the role her mother had once held, determined to carry forward the research on radiation. Science had been Marie's gift to the world, and now her own blood carried that mission forward. But science had changed in the years after Marie's death. The understanding of radiation deepened. The invisible force she had studied so tirelessly was no longer a mystery. It was now both a cure and a weapon, a force that could heal or destroy. Medical researchers built upon her discoveries, refining radiation therapy, learning how to harness radium's power to treat cancer. Hospitals across the world used it, giving hope to those once thought beyond saving. But while medicine embraced radium, another force had seized it as well. Physicists began to explore the energy locked within the atom itself. The discovery of nuclear fission in 1938, just 4 years after Marie's death, there was a breakthrough that would reshape the world. The very principles she had uncovered now led to something unimaginable: the atomic bomb. It was not her work, not her intention, but the chain of discovery she had helped set in motion had led to this moment. The element she had spent her life studying, the field she had pioneered, had given mankind the power to destroy itself. Would she have approved? Would she have condemned it? No one could say. She had always believed in science as a force for good, and in discovery as a means of bettering the world. She had never feared knowledge, never shied away from its consequences. But the power of science was in the hands of those who wielded it. As the world stood on the brink of another war, as scientists debated the ethics of their newfound power, one thing remained certain: Marie Curie's name would never be forgotten. The war had ended, but the echoes of its destruction remained. Science, the very force that Marie Curie had dedicated her life to, had changed the course of history, first as a tool of healing, then as a force of annihilation. The atomic bomb had redefined the world's relationship with radiation, leaving behind questions that had no easy answers. And yet, even as nuclear power cast its long shadow over the 20th century, Marie's true legacy endured. Her discoveries had not just altered physics, they had transformed medicine. Radium therapy, the technique she had pioneered, was now saving lives in ways she could never have imagined. Cancer treatment, once a hopeless battle, had found a new weapon. Patients who had once been given no chance of survival now had hope, all because of her work. But even as science advanced, so did its understanding of the very thing that had both made her famous and taken her life. By the 1950s, researchers understood what Marie had not: that radium, the glowing substance she had handled with her bare hands, was a silent killer. The burns on her skin, the exhaustion, and the strange illnesses that had plagued her final years. It was radiation poisoning, a danger she had unknowingly lived with every day. The radium girls, the factory workers who had painted watch dials with radium paint, suffered the same fate. Their bodies bore the scars of a substance they had once believed was harmless. Many of them had died. Their bones weakened. Their health deteriorated in ways no one had predicted. Marie had been one of the first victims of radiation exposure, but she would not be the last. Her notebooks, her papers, even her personal belongings, everything she had touched, remained dangerously radioactive. Decades after her death, they were stored in lead-lined boxes, their contents too dangerous to handle without protective equipment. Her legacy was untouchable in more ways than one, and yet she remained a symbol of brilliance, of perseverance, and of the boundless potential of the human mind. Schools, universities, and research institutes bore her name. The element curium, discovered in 1944, was named in her honor, a tribute to the woman who had first unlocked the secrets of radioactivity. The medical field continued to build upon her work, refining radiotherapy and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Her daughters carried her legacy forward. Irene, the child who had once followed her mother onto the battlefields of World War I, became a scientist in her own right, winning a Nobel Prize in 1935 for her discovery of artificial radioactivity. Even though not a scientist, she ensured that her mother's story was told, writing a biography that brought Marie's life to the world. But Marie Curie was more than just a name in history. She had become something greater, an icon, an inspiration, a force that transcended time. Women who had once been told that science was not for them now looked to her as proof that there were no limits. Girls who had been discouraged from studying physics, from dreaming of careers in medicine, and from seeing themselves in laboratories and research institutions now had a model to follow. She had been the first, but she would not be the last. The barriers she had broken were never rebuilt. Her work had opened doors that could never be closed again. And even as the world changed, even as technology advanced beyond what she could have imagined, one truth remained. Marie Curie's legacy would never fade. The world had moved forward, yet Marie Curie's name remained etched into the foundations of science, whispered in classrooms, and emblazoned on research institutes. She had been gone for decades, yet her presence endured not just in books, not just in laboratories, but in the very way the world understood the universe. She had uncovered something greater than radium, greater than polonium. She had uncovered the power of perseverance, of relentless curiosity, of a mind unwilling to yield to convention. She had lived in a time when women were expected to remain silent, yet she had spoken louder than most. She had entered a world where science belonged to men, yet she had reshaped it with her own hands. She had never sought fame, yet she became one of the most celebrated figures in history. Her work had not just advanced human knowledge, it had changed what was possible. The field of medicine owed her its evolution. Cancer treatment, which had once been nothing more than desperate hope, now carried the precision of radiation therapy. Hospitals bore her name, research institutes carried on her mission, and doctors used the very element she had dedicated her life to in order to heal where once there had been no cure. Physics had been reshaped by her discoveries. The concept of radioactivity, once a mystery, had become a cornerstone of modern science. Her research had laid the foundation for nuclear energy, for advancements in medicine, and for new understandings of the universe itself. But her true legacy was not just in the equations, not just in the discoveries. It was in the minds she had inspired. Generations of women followed in her footsteps, their path made possible by the barriers she had shattered. She had not fought for recognition, yet she had won it. She had not sought to be a symbol, yet she had become one, and in the quiet of history, long after the applause had faded, after the scandals had been forgotten, after the world had moved forward, her light still shone. The glow of radium, once a mystery, had revealed itself to be dangerous. The element she had given to the world had been used to both heal and destroy. But the true light she had left behind was not the glow of a substance, not the physical traces of her work. It was the light of knowledge of a woman who had refused to be defined by limits, of a scientist who had changed the world, not because she sought to, but because she could not accept anything less than the truth. Marie Curie had never feared the unknown. She had embraced it, pursued it, and uncovered it piece by piece. And because of her, the world would never see science the same way again. She had once said, "One never notices what has been done. One can only see what remains to be done." And though she was gone, her work was far from finished.